Hello everybody and welcome to the ACE webcast. For this session we're going to be talking about net zero with Diego Padilla-Philipps. So first of all, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Hannah Ducas and I work at WSP in the structures department as a senior engineer. And I've been working with the ACE emerging professionals for a couple of years now, and I'm really thrilled to have Diego here to talk about net zero. So to start us off, I just want yourself, Diego, to tell us who you are and what you do day to day.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm Diego Padilla-Philipps. I am a technical director at WSP in London, but I am also the net zero lead for property and buildings in the UK. I've been working with Hannah, luckily, for several years now. And on my day-to-day, I've got two roles, really. So I work on delivering projects. I worked on 22 Bishopsgate, the Admiralty Arch, and a few projects outside of the UK as well. I lead the structures team and as part of a multidisciplinary team. And the other half of my job is to drive the decarbonisation strategy at WSP structures and property and buildings, finding ways to reduce the carbon emissions of all of our designs and advice in line with the commitment we made 2 years ago of halving all of the absolute emissions of everything we design by 2030. So yeah, very exciting two things, I think.
Brilliant. So you're talking about that with in terms of within WSP, but what does net zero mean in regard to the actual construction industry at the moment?
It's incredible how it has taken off in the last 18 months. So 2 years ago, when we started talking about net zero and reducing carbon emissions, it was a challenge. And suddenly everyone has realized how important it is. So to the construction industry, this is the biggest challenge of our generation. It's such an exciting time to be a designer, engineer, and architect because we have an opportunity to really make a difference. The the every industry has been growing and affecting the planet and the environment massively over the last hundreds of years, and suddenly we are at that point when we have to do something. So this generation is the one that can make that difference. In some cases, it involves reassessing everything that we do, challenging the status quo. And in other aspects, it means challenging what we've been doing for so many years and challenging clients and markets and etc. So it is the biggest challenge, but at the same time, it's just such an exciting challenge.
Oh, fantastic. So, talking on obviously net zero and how important and how this change needs to come about, how do we become net zero and what are the measures that we're implementing at the moment across the industry?
It's such a big question, that one. Let's see if we can answer in 3 minutes. I guess we need to think about what it really means to be net zero. And it means reducing our carbon emissions as much as we can, reducing the carbon emissions from all the processes, all the materials, all the construction processes and systems, and all the carbon emissions from the services within the building. And once we reduce that to the minimum, the very, very minimum, then find ways to offset the rest, find ways to balance the rest. That is why it's called net zero rather than absolute zero, because there's a few things that we might never be able to decarbonize. And if you can't, say, for example, in the cement industry, you capture those emissions so that they never make it into the atmosphere. But the focus should be on the first part, which is on the using less. There, as structural engineers, we work with materials and we work with structural systems, but what we really work with, I think, is geometry, and that has a massive driver to reducing the amount of materials that we use. So using less should be the absolute first decision. How can we build less? How can we reuse the existing structure as much as we can? And that should be something that we challenge at every level. And I mean at every stage of the project, but also engineers and architects from different levels, from the most senior to the most junior. When we get a new brief and we get a new project, we should really question the brief and say, is this really necessary? Can we use what we already have? In some cases, as you will know, of course, reusing what we already have makes the rest of the project more carbon intensive. So we need to find that sweet spot. A very easy example is facades. If you retain a facade, suddenly your levels have to be retained, and then your structural zone is reduced, and suddenly everything is more expensive and thicker and heavier. But going back to the point is finding those ways to using less materials, designing things efficiently, designing things to the highest utilization. We don't need to add any additional safety factors. But at the same time, do all of this within an umbrella and a philosophy of reducing your carbon emissions, having a target to work towards. As an engineer, as a company, you should think about where are we now, how carbon intensive is what we design, and where do we want to be? What do we need to do less of? What do we need to do more of? What sort of projects do we need to enhance? Do we work more with other materials, etc.? Because someone once told me that we are the glue in between the clients and the construction industry. We are the ones with the knowledge. We are the designers. We are the ones that should influence all of those decisions across the entire supply chain. Yeah, I think.
Fantastic. I think that's kind of semi-answered. So what do you think is the future for our industry regarding net zero? Do you think we will be, as you said, designing less and not trying to retain structures, etc., for the future for us to be net zero?
I think it's a real challenge, and it depends on your context as well. If we think about somewhere like the UK, we have such a vast amount of existing infrastructure and buildings that our objective should be to reuse that, repurpose them as much as we can. And happily, we are seeing that is happening. Clients are choosing to refurbish their buildings, to extend the life, to expand them and build around them. That because we have to make use of the materials that we already have. And when that's not the case, I mean, we're working on this project in London, and we have an existing shopping center, and in some cases we cannot really reuse existing buildings, but we should see all of the materials in that site as assets, and we should look at them and finding ways to reuse them as close as possible to the original design. Say, if you have a slab, for example, it should ideally be used as a slab as well. But if you can't use it as a slab, at least use it in something else, such as street furniture, for example, or paving slabs for landscaping. And so repurpose, reuse, and gradually find a way not to downcycle it too much. And at the last resource, you make it again into raw materials. That should be one. The next thing is that net zero is currently something that we're all learning. We're learning as we go, but it should become standard practice really quickly. It should be everything that we do, and I see that when we work with universities, their degrees now have strong focus on sustainability and carbon emissions, which is great. It's so encouraging to see that the next generation are coming with those principles already there in mind. And the final thing I see as the future of the industry is the carbon budget. I think that there is a limited amount of carbon emissions that the atmosphere can handle. It's a limited amount. So every country has a portion of it. That portion of carbon emissions should become a carbon budget, and that it's a finite element, so that everything that we do in the country has to be within those limits. Currently, we have guidance from LETI, for example, to have targets per square meter. But a target per square meter doesn't make any sense. If you build 3 times more, it should be eventually an absolute value that you cannot exceed. And I think that's coming. You can see that the government is sending signals. The government has increased the price of carbon. There's a shadow price of carbon to assess infrastructure projects. It is going in that direction, I think.
Fantastic. I'd just like to say thank you so much, and definitely opened up my eyes, and hopefully it's opened up a lot of other people's eyes to what is net zero, what we're kind of doing at the moment to implement net zero. And as you said, we're continually learning. So the more we know and more we build and more we understand about how we can make our industry more net zero, hopefully, and we can have another talk in the future and see how it's progressed. So
if I could just add one thing, it starts with us. We have the power to make those decisions and to influence. The thing that made me so aware of carbon emissions was that one of my buildings, the building I'm so proud of being a part of, if I calculate 1% of the embodied carbon emissions from that building, that is equivalent of almost 100 years of my personal carbon emissions. So if that is the power that we have. So if I can save 1%, that's 100 years. So anything else I can do, this is much more meaningful. As designers, as engineers, as architects, we have that level of influence, and we should. It's a massive responsibility, and we should be driving change because we can and we must.
fantastic. Right, brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Diego, and we'll have an update soon. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Thank
Bye.
you.